dark-complexioned, dark-haired people, or the cargo shorts and double tank tops, or that shoulders squared, tits-out posture with a tude. Whatever it was, her Spanish was fluid and sounded like no American-accented version he'd ever heard. He was hardly an expert, but he'd bet it was her first, and quite possibly only, language. Damn. The unexpected disappointment had him straightening in his chair. No, it was just as well. He'd come to El Tigre for a vacation, partly because he just plain needed one, and partly because lately he'd begun questioning the choices he'd made, choices that until recently he'd found perfectly satisfying. He laid the blame for the current rise in second-guessing himself squarely on his brother's shoulders. Of the 7 Kavanagh siblings, he was closest to Devlin in both age and shared interests. And last year, Dev had gone and gotten himself hitched. The guy was so moon-faced in love with his wife, Jane, that Finn was kind of embarrassed for him. Yet he found himself surprisingly envious as well. And that tipped so far to the left of normal he could hardly wrap his mind around it. Despite, or more likely partly because of, Aunt Eileen's constant harping about how it was time he traded in his bachelor ways for the love of a good woman, he'd always reveled in his single status. He'd sure as hell never harbored a burning desire to change from a me to a we. He got enough of that crap working side by side with his brothers every day. So when he'd suddenly begun questioning why he'd been patting himself on the back simply because he dodged having a special woman in his life for longer than a night or the occasional weekend, it had stirred up a never-before-encountered restlessness, an itchy sensation that had reached epic proportions when he'd started to wonder if maybe it wasn't time he joined the ranks of the committed-to-one-relationship grown-ups. So hell yeah, he was jumpy. His thoughts had never trekked that particular trail before, and he could honestly say he wasn't all that thrilled to have them trekking it now. That he was even thinking about settling down, however, had driven home how much he needed to get away and see if this was something he actually wanted, if maybe it was time he grew up and joined the marriage brigade that was an integral part of his large extended family. Or if he had simply been brainwashed by all the happy shit that seemed to surround him these days. His gut told him it was the latter, but with these chick-type thoughts popping into his head lately, who was to say his gut wasn't overcompensating? In any event, he didn't have to figure out everything right this minute. All he really needed to do this evening was drink his beer, check out the pretty girl, and contemplate which route in this part of the Andes he most wanted to hike. And relax. Yeah, especially that. Above all else, he'd come here to relax. This was the worst damn birthday Magdalene Deluca could ever remember. God knew a few back in her early teens had been pretty crappy, but that happened when a girl's parents shipped her off to boarding school in order to free up more time to pour their missionary fervor into other people's kids. Gazing at the shot of tequila the bartender had just given her, she was sorely tempted to toss it back where she stood and hold out the empty for a refill. Hey, she liked to party as much as the next woman, and if she got a little buzzed, well, there was no one here she had to be accountable to for her behavior. A bitter laugh escaped her. No shit. All the same, she walked away from the bar, took a seat at a nearby table, and simply stared for a moment into the pale amber liquor. Then she picked up a wedge of lime, bit into it, and tossed back the shot of tequila. She shuddered as warmth flowed down her throat and spread through her veins. Yet it didn't touch the coldness in the pit of her stomach. But that was her own fault, because damn it, would she never learn? She'd taken a leave of absence from her life in California to come running down here. The last 2 letters from her mother had detailed Nancy Deluca's distress with the way the Munoz cartel, over her frequent, clearly stated objections, kept trying to recruit some of the barely teenaged boys and girls the Delucas mentored. It wasn't the letters alone that had brought Mags to El Tigre, however, although those had certainly set up a niggling in the pit of her stomach. It was the way all communication from her mom suddenly ceased after she'd received them. That had really made her get her butt in gear. The abrupt lack of communication had given her a very bad feeling.